Okay, that's a little loud, don't you think? Yeah. Let's begin with the prayer here in just a second. All right. We implore you, good Jesus, that as in your mercy you have given us to drink in with delight the words of your knowledge, so of your loving kindness you will grant us one day to come to you, the fountain of all wisdom, and to stand forever before your face. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, ever one God, world without end. Amen. Last time we started working through chapters 1 through 4, so we've gotten really far, and I'm not entirely sure where we stopped, but in any case, I want to kind of review the situation in chapters 1 through 4, and then hopefully we can start to introduce at least chapters 5 through 10 and see how those chapters build upon some of the themes in 1 through 4. So there's a series of episodes here that really work well together. They contrast well together. You can see how very brilliantly organized and situated everything is in this gospel. Just how very, very meticulously and deliberately structured. Starting with especially the wedding at Cana, where Christ turns water into wine, and then bookending that in chapter 4 with Jesus's return to Galilee and healing the nobleman's son. So this episode is nicely, sort of, or this section is introduced and ended with two different signs in more or less the same place. The sort of overall theme here, or the picture that we get, is one of catechesis. Christ gradually, little by little, revealing himself to people, and obviously different people are going to react differently. And with each little step they take towards Christ, something new is discovered about him. It's really gonna build to this event. If I skip ahead here somewhere, at the beginning of chapter 5, with Christ's healing of the paralytic, which happens on the Sabbath day, and that's going to be a huge problem. Okay, so in chapters 1 through 4, we start to get this partitioning of Christ's audience. You have the Jerusalemites on the one hand who are kind of stubborn to Christ's signs and don't want to sort of accept them as they are, and are kind of twisting things and rejecting Christ. And then him being accepted by the outsiders, people in Galilee, the Samaritans. Then here, at the Feast of Pentecost, Christ is going to return to Jerusalem, heal the paralytic man on the Sabbath, and that's going to set up the basic conflict that's going to take us up to the Passion. So you kind of get these catechetical chapters here. These sort of this instruction, this gradual teaching of the people. Here I am, the beginning of my ministry. And then you get kind of, okay, now people more or less understand who this person is. He's revealed himself, and we're really going to see kind of who are the faithful and who are the unfaithful. So that's what we're building to in chapters 5 through 10. But there are still a few things that I want to point out from this section. Just again to emphasize that we really have some nice pairings here. We get the wedding at Cana where people invite him to the wedding. Christ is, a guest of honor, and he responds to that invitation by providing even more than what he was invited to bring, right? Usually, I mean, when I show up at weddings, like, people don't expect me to bring the wine, right? Nor would I. I expect there to be wine provided, but he's an especially generous guest. But then we have him intruding upon the temple. So I think that was kind of like the last bit we ended on last time, that he's not invited to the temple. I mean, it is his father's house, so that's an interesting situation, right? Like, well, I kind of own the place, right? So, but people don't recognize him as being the one whose temple it is. So to them, he's intruding. They haven't invited him. He comes in and he's kicking people out. So that's a nice contrast between those two episodes to start chapter 2. Then chapter 3 contains 2 more episodes, which are neatly juxtaposed in the same chapter, and interesting to compare. So we get Nicodemus and the display of his ignorance about who Christ is and his real kind of wishy-washiness. He cares about what other people think of him. He also understands that this Jesus is an important person, so he wants Jesus to like him as well, but he can't have both. He can't have everyone else liking him and Jesus liking him. But then John the Baptist, who again we see does not really care what anyone thinks of him, right? Other than, his whole entire life is a mission. Yeah? I mean, he's got one singular purpose to his life that he never deviates from, and he doesn't really care about working his way up any kind of social ladder or even any sort of religious hierarchy among the Jewish people. So he's followed because of his virtues, because he's virtuous, not because he has a high social standing, right? And then chapter 4, the Samaritan woman, again, her belief contrasts nicely with the episode with Nicodemus, because she is genuinely inquisitive. So the kind of catechetical episodes, I think, really can be the episode with Saint Fotini, who is the Samaritan woman. That kind of encapsulates Christ's instruction in one picture, and what it looks like to be sort of the proper student, the proper recipient of Christ's wisdom and his teaching, and what it is Christ is trying to teach us. So very important kind of practical lessons for Lent. So let's look a little bit at St. Cyril's commentary on Nicodemus, first of all. So again, this is on chapter 3. The first part of chapter 3. There was just to give you a little bit of scripture from the beginning of the chapter. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a leader of the Jews. He came to Jesus by night and said to him, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him." Nicodemus is quite ready to believe, and we're gonna see him crop up again in the next set of chapters, and he's going to basically argue that people should reserve judgment about Christ and not condemn him too quickly. Nicodemus is quite ready to believe, but since he is overcome by an unhealthy regard for others and does not ignore other people's opinion, unlike John the Baptist, he refuses to be forthright and divides his mind in two. He cripples his intention and is weak in both knees, as it is written in 1 Kings 18. I mean, St. Cyril just has all this stuff in his head, right? And he's like talking about, I mean, this is really, he's incredible. Oftentimes he will say, St. Cyril will say, he'll quote something and then he'll say, as the prophet says somewhere. So he might not, the line and verse, might not come directly to his head, but he's memorized, vast chunks of scripture. So it's not like he's going through and he's like looking stuff up. I mean, he's just writing about the Gospel of John and making these connections. So he cripples his intention and is weak in both knees, as it is written, pressed by the argument of his conscience that he should believe because of the surpassing quality of the miracles, but estimating that the loss of his leadership over the people is intolerable since he was a leader of the Jews. So again, Christ is revealing himself little by little, showing people who he is through these signs. So as a way of instructing the people, and Nicodemus is seeing that and detecting it and kind of interpreting it in the right way, but he's still clinging on to his position, his reputation, thinking that he can both preserve his reputation with them and with the Jews and secretly be faithful. He makes the darkness of the night a co-worker in his scheme, and he comes to Jesus. So notice St. Cyril's really focusing on this tiny detail, which is very easily overlooked, that Nicodemus came to him at night, right? So there's nothing in here. This is one of the things about this gospel. There's really not any detail that is insignificant. So he comes to Jesus at night. By coming in secret, he is convicted of being double-minded. So even though he appears kind of genuine, he's really not, because he's using the cover of darkness to kind of conceal the fact that he's curious about Jesus, because he's worried about, well, if everyone else realizes I'm doing this, then it'll show that maybe I'm not as much of an authority figure to them as they think it's going to undermine my authority over them, because I'm going to this person as an authority. I can't do what he does. And this is immediately, like I said, before we get an explanation from John the Baptist, which includes the sort of the famous verse 3:30. He must increase, but I must decrease. Right? He who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth is earthly and speaks of the earth. He who comes from heaven is above all. He who, and then later on, 3:29, or right before where I just read. He who is the bride is the bridegroom, the friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. For this reason, my joy has been fulfilled. So obviously there's a lot of wedding imagery here. I mean, there's an actual literal wedding, and then this is understood kind of figuratively, right? Christ is, he says, the bridegroom and ruler of the feast, while I am the one who invites people to the supper and who leads the bride. So John the Baptist has been inviting people, right, to follow this person, not inviting people to follow himself. I consider it, this is St. Cyril just kind of, speaking as if he were John the Baptist. I consider it my highest joy and most illustrious honor merely to be counted among his friends and to hear the voice of the one who feasts. Therefore, I already have what I long for, and my zealous pursuit has been accomplished. For I not only proclaimed that Christ would come, but also I have already seen him present, But you, my wise disciples, those would be the disciples of John the Baptist who have been engaged in this argument about, well, Jesus's disciples are not baptizing more people than John the Baptist is baptizing. But you, my wise disciples, the disciples of John the Baptist, when you see human nature which is betrothed to Christ going to him, and when you observe the nature that is cut off and running away from its love for him, ascending to spiritual intimacy through holy baptism, do not be upset that this is not for me, John the Baptist says. In other words, I'm not in competition with Christ for followers. And this is kind of the debate that they're having. This person. So right, John the Baptist came and he's baptizing people, directing them towards Christ. But then someone who he baptizes, Jesus of Nazareth, is starting to kind of one up him, right? So that's, in the way of the world, that would be kind of offensive. That would be kind of offensive because, the one who initiated it, should be the one who's getting, the most glory, the most credit, having the most followers, things like that. And in earthly terms, that it would be kind of, it would be kind of a corruption of hierarchy. But John the Baptist is saying, no, actually, even though I came first and I started doing this first of all, his baptism is different than my baptism. It's not the same baptism. And I'm only doing this, I'm only a means to him who is the end. And so my entire joy is in handing over the souls that I directed towards him to him, and in just seeing him present. His mission, in other words, his lifelong mission has been fulfilled. And there's absolutely no loss of dignity to himself. Yeah. So it's interesting how we see Nicodemus on the one hand trying to preserve his social status, in other words, and then
I would say more dignity to himself.
Yeah, sure. More dignity, yeah. So the depths of humility here. Oh, this is rather nice passage from Saint Cyril. While the gloom of night darkens the depths of the atmosphere, so he's giving us an image to work with, to compare with the relationship between John the Baptist and Christ. While the gloom of night darkens the depths of the atmosphere, one may well admire the morning star shining with its golden light and conspicuous in its full glory. But when the sun has already promised to rise and sprinkles the world with a bit of light, the star is overcome by something greater and yields to it as it advances little by little. It may well speak the words of John, since it is experiencing the same thing. He says he is undergoing. So just a nice, poetic picture. Then the Samaritan woman, and Saint Cyril has a lot to say about this exchange between Saint Fotini and Christ. So in the early church, the Samaritan woman is identified with Saint Fotini, who with her family eventually moved to Carthage, where they were martyred under Nero. So Saint Fotini, Samaritan woman, this is the same person. He has a lot to say about the Samaritan woman, like I said, as really showing us how to be catechumens of the faith, how to be students of the faith, which is really a never-ending process. And if you think about a lot of what he has to say, he has a lot to say. I've only carved out a chunk. If you think about it in light of his own experience, he's himself spent 5 years in the Egyptian desert monasteries, which of course by the 400s when he was there had already had several hundred years old tradition. And that relationship between sort of novice and elder, if you will, you can really see come out a lot in what he comments on here with the Samaritan woman. Inquiry, St. Cyril says, is the beginning of learning. A question about something is the root of understanding for those who are ignorant of it. Christ reveals himself not to untaught or completely unlearned souls, but he shines forth and appears to those souls who are already more prepared to want to learn, and who, giving birth to the beginning of faith, in simple words, hasten on towards the knowledge of the more perfect. He's kind of opened up a can of worms here. He didn't know it was a can of worms because he's living in the 4th and 5th century. But the point that he's making here, which we discussed last time, this becomes a well established idea in Orthodoxy, but it becomes kind of problematic in the West, especially. But it's very much in accord with the tradition of the Desert Fathers, with the monastic tradition that he knew. Christ shines forth and appears to those souls who are already more prepared to want to learn, and who, giving birth to the beginning of faith, in simple words, hasten on towards the knowledge of the more perfect. The Samaritan woman was shown to us to be such a woman. She applied her mind to truly divine ideas. Yeah, thanks for the... Truly divine ideas more coarsely than she ought. So she applies her mind more coarsely than she ought initially, but she was not completely removed from the desire to know something. First, she does not immediately give Christ a drink when he asks for it. She does not immediately give Christ a drink when he asks for it. Instead, she's like, what are you doing asking me for a drink? You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan. You're not supposed to do that. When she sees him breaking the national custom of the Jews, she first asks him to tell her about the transgression, rather than just handing over the drink. She's curious, right? She's curious. Now, she kind of misunderstands the situation, and it's kind of out of that misunderstanding that she's hesitant to offer him the drink. But by her mention of it, she all but invites the Lord to give a full explanation of who he is, which is she was just there. She goes there every day, right, to Jacob's well to get water. This is just a matter, this is just a routine part of her life. And then this particular day, a Jewish guy shows up and asks her for water, which is just not something that anyone has ever done before, and then reveals to her that he's the anointed one, right? And this escalates very, 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 very quickly, but nevertheless, she's prepared. And this is the point Cyril's making, which I think when you see it, and then you read the gospel, it's pretty undeniable. It's pretty undeniable. The feast at Cana, they invite Christ. Christ comes. He reveals who he is. The disciples, even before that, are asking him, like, where are you staying? And he turns and he looks at them face to face. So they're initiating the move. They're making the first move. And then he's responding with even more, like, they're not necessarily understanding the situation in the right. The disciples say, tell us where you're staying. Christ says, it's not going to do you any good if I just tell you where I'm staying. He says, you have to come. I'm not just going to tell you. Come and see, right? And we talked about that in relation to, coming to church, right? It's not just to have some kind of like theoretical knowledge or intellectual knowledge of, these things or whatever. Like you have to come and you have to actually like do these things. But the point Cyril's making is that the disciples are like primed for that. And it's in the case of the disciples, John the Baptist, who's primed and readied them. In the case of the Samaritan woman, she quotes scripture. She knows scripture, right? I know that the Messiah is coming, she says, 4:25, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. And she's ready, and she firmly believes that, and she's looking for that already. And then when Christ comes and says, I am, right? Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. It says, she says, okay, let me go tell everyone else. So I alluded to like kind of the controversial like nature of what Cyril is saying. We mentioned last time a little bit about this conference. It seems unclear, like it sort of seems to take a little bit of faith in order to have faith. It seems to take a little bit of faith to come and see. And then you go and see, and then you get faith, right? You become faithful. And so there's sort of like we mentioned last time, like a chicken and egg problem. In the history of Western Christianity, you see a lot of attempts to try to work that out. Who's making the first move? Is the person making the first move, or is God making the first move? Is Christ making the first move? And it becomes a particular problem. Here in Saint Cyril's time, there's someone, actually he's from Wales, of all places, Pelagius, and he's preaching that, well, you have it in you. You have your moral improvement in you, and you are not dependent upon any gifts, of grace. And so he's even telling people like, you don't, baptism isn't even a necessity. So you have kind of that extreme. And then on the other side, you get a different explanation, which is, well, you have absolutely nothing in you which is capable of any improvement. You have to be given everything, right? And you hear that voice particularly in St. Augustine. And that's going to sort of like direct the conversation in Western Christianity. But what St. Cyril's putting forth here really was before, is in his time, and is going to remain the Orthodox position regarding that whole question, of free will and grace and predestination and election and all of that stuff. This remains the Orthodox response from now to from Saint Cyril's time to Gregory Palamas to in the 1600s, 1672. There's going to be a synod in Jerusalem with the council, and it's presided over by the Patriarch of Jerusalem. His name is Dosithius. It produces this what's called the Confession of Dosithius, but it's the canons of the Synod of Jerusalem, and it's a general council, so it has authoritative, it's an authoritative document in the church, and it's gonna repeat this idea from Saint Cyril. So it's interesting how in the West there's a lot of attempts to try to work out this chicken and egg problem. It seems like people how are people turning towards Christ? Is there something of their own will that's turning towards Christ, or is God actually like picking some people to turn towards Christ and ignoring other people who are not turning towards Christ? And so people are really, really trapped in that problem in the West. The East is not trapped in that problem. as near as I can tell, which I'm not an expert in anything, but I've also asked people who have a lot more expertise in this than me, and that's kind of the consensus. The Orthodox response stays the same throughout the centuries, looking at how Christ comes to reveal himself on all these occasions, including here in the Gospel of John. And so this occasion with Saint Fotini, the Samaritan woman, I think is a good explanation of how how coming to know Christ works in Orthodoxy. So for a lot of us, like myself, with a lot of baggage, this is really something I think to like sink your teeth in, and to try to reconcile yourself with, especially during Lent. Because there's just a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise about free will and grace and and all of that.
The baggage is the point. I just read recently, wonderful you're going over this. Just recently there was a church, I can't remember the saint said this, forgive me. The saint was asked, if God is everywhere, why liturgy? Why come to church? And the saint answered, for the same reason that we believe that water molecules are all around us in the air. But if we're thirsty, we still have to go to a fountain and drink. And then he sprung off of that into the Samaritan woman.
Oh, that's good.
And one of the things he mentioned about the Samaritan woman, speaking of baggage, Scripture is very clear that she came in the heat of the day. Nobody else goes in the heat of the day to do this kind of labor and draw the waters. She did it because of her shame. Because the life of shame that was in her. She came when nobody else would be going to the well, and that's precisely when Jesus meets her right there at the well. And the saint was saying, that's the liturgy. It isn't about who came first. It's about the one coming to the well with shame and Christ coming to meet us to relieve us and save us. I thought that was a beautiful thought, right in line with what you're talking about.
Yeah, very good. Very good. She's in the position because of humility, right? Which we just saw, we just see this on the heels of John the Baptist as well. Explaining to his disciples what his position really is, vis-a-vis Christ. Good. Yeah, I think that's a nice point that's gonna help us connect the dots between what we see here with the Samaritan woman and some of the themes later on, where Christ's offering to people is going to be medicinal, is going to be a kind of medicine to them. And right, he heals the paralytic man, and then it kind of goes from there. When Saint Cyril continues, as the catechetical discourse, so that's what he's calling this. It's interesting. It's and in the monastic tradition, you get dialogues in a real classical tradition, and it's interesting. So John Cassian is writing about this time as well, and he has moved he's originally from the Balkans, but he spent 19 years in monasteries, including in Egypt, and then he takes that monastic tradition from Egypt and he goes to France and he founds a monastery in Marseille, and he writes these they're called conferences, but they're dialogues. And so. And it's basic, more or less the same generation as Cyril, and they're mutual acquaintances with some of the same people anyway. That's definitely verifiable. But he's really seen this as a model for that kind of instruction So as the catechetical discourse proceeds, she receives his accusation as medicine for salvation and finally confesses him to be a prophet. She puts another question to him, saying from a desire to learn, "Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where one should worship is Jerusalem." So she's saying this as a Samaritan speaking to a Jew, okay? You Jews, not like you, Jesus, but you Jews, okay, say that the place to worship is Jerusalem. Then he began to teach that the time is coming, or rather is already here, in which the true worshipers will reject the worship on earthly mountains and will offer to God the Father higher service in the Spirit. And we're going to see this theme developed because there's going to be a stark contrast between the kind of legalism of the Jews and Christ's fulfillment of the law in the next chapters. But she considers the best of all to be fitting for the Christ alone and reserves the more perfect knowledge for his times. So she says, "We know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Do you see how ready for faith the woman was already getting, and how she was advancing from insignificant questions to a higher disposition? So insignificant question, for instance, being like, "Why would you, a Jew, ask me for water?" To now like a significant question, which is, well, like, where do we worship properly? What does proper worship look like, and what will the Christ reveal to us about who really is the faithful and who isn't the faithful, and who's worshiping in the right place and who's worshiping in the wrong place? So that's a more significant question, and it's incredible, like I said, how quickly this this process develops. And so he needs to uncover for her with clearer words what she desires, and to take what was reserved in good hope and place it right in front of her by saying, "I am he who is speaking to you." And this is a point Cyril makes again and again throughout this gospel, that Christ is very careful, he's very prudent about what he reveals to who and at what time. And there are these occasions where he's kind of holding back, and that can be a little bit puzzling. Cyril has a nice explanation for that. He's kind of holding back in some spots in order to show us how we should behave, or how we should give thanks to God, or how we should glorify God. But then at other times when he needs to, Christ is very blunt and direct. And so Cyril kind of contrasts there are these two these two attitudes of Christ towards people that he talks to in this gospel. Again, sometimes kind of holding some things back, and then other times like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna hit you with it, I'm just gonna, like, you're ready, like he's felt this situation out. And this woman is humble enough, and she's inquisitive enough. She has no agenda, right? Nicodemus kind of has this agenda. She has no agenda. So he says, "Okay, like, you don't have to wait anymore. I'm the guy you've been expecting." So Christ is going through Samaria. He has to go through Samaria. He needed to go through Samaria. We talked about that last time, in order to get back to Galilee, where he performs another miracle of healing the nobleman's son. And Cyril interprets this, for the sake of time, we will kind of skip over the commentary, but he interprets this as a place where Christ is returning to the faithful and deepening their faith. So he's previously sown the impression that he can do all things by the signs which he had already accomplished there. And so again, we get kind of this picture of what catechesis looks like. Let's at least introduce the next set of chapters. And we're not going to, at this point, we've got two more sessions. We're not going to make it through in 2 sessions the rest of the gospel, and I've kind of resigned myself to that. But I think it's probably better to work sequentially rather than to skip around. So that's I mean, there are benefits to doing both ways, but I'm just going to keep going. sequentially. So the next set is contains six chapters, which are really self-contained. Chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, 8, 9, and 10. And most of these chapters, it's really interesting, kind of open up with a little vignette, a little like event. And then long speech by Jesus. Little event, long speech by Jesus. Little event, long speech by Jesus. And some of them are just long speech by Jesus. But so we're really getting a lot of discourse here. So chapter 5, the healing of the paralytic on the Sabbath at Pentecost, and Cyril, we're going to focus in on this episode. Number one, it's a personal favorite of mine, and number two, Cyril has some very interesting things that illuminate the importance of this event. But it's on the Sabbath, and it's at Pentecost, commemorating when the Torah was given to Moses, as well as the wheat harvest. So it's an agricultural festival as well. In Jerusalem, Jesus heals a paralyzed man. And then chapter 6 opens with the feeding of the 5,000. So Jesus offers 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish to feed 5,000 people. And chapter 7, Jesus returns to Jerusalem secretly, because people are kind of plotting his murder, for the feast celebrating the harvest and commemorating the tabernacles that the Jews lived in after their flight from Egypt. The Jewish leaders plot his murder, and Jesus challenges them then publicly in the temple for attempt. So he arrives secretly, but then publicly challenges them for healing, for attempting to kill him for healing on the Sabbath. So you see how, these chapters are really linked to this event of healing the paralytic man on the Sabbath. This is really this is where people really are starting to get mad about this guy, because he's directly a challenging authority, and he does this thing in Jerusalem, of all places, and he does this on the day of Pentecost. So he's defying the law. He's defying the law of Moses on the feast, which commemorates the giving of the law to Moses. Right? So he's a real rebel there. Chapter 8, beginning, he restores the adulterous woman, and then he proceeds to teach in the temple. Chapter 9, he restores sight to the blind, again on the Sabbath, so he's not going to stop doing what he's doing. The Pharisees cast that man out. And this leads up to the Good Shepherd discourse in chapter 10, where Jesus explains he is the Good Shepherd who lays down his life for God's people. He then returns to Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication, which is now known as Hanukkah, and it commemorates in the year 164 BC. During the Maccabees, the Jews recaptured the temple, and he's questioned about whether he is the Christ, and he explains that he and the Father are one. He then withdraws to the wilderness, and the Jews consider whether to arrest him. So we'll start next time with the healing of the paralytic, which is really, like I said, going to kind of set things in motion for the rest of the gospel. All right. Cool.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.